What up, boys? Today I wanted to talk about the healing menace that has been plaguing our PvP and MMORPGs. It's time this torment of healers being too overpowered finally comes to its bitter end. Devs have really showcased zero talent in balancing healers in past MMOs, since they've always been too overpowered in every MMO that I have played in. I mean, just look at this, man. This is insane. New World had really no idea on how to balance healers whatsoever, and this is just insane to me that this is even allowed to exist in an MMO. I'm sure now you can guess healers are now, without a doubt, the most important class to get correct while making an MMORPG. They are your backbone of your team. They were ultimately what keeps your useless ass alive when you get hit by that AoE that your tank has been telling you to avoid. I could be way off here, but that's exactly what this video is about. Discussion. I will discuss some major points about healers and how they greatly affect PvP. If the healer is overtuned in PvE, content will turn into a complete joke because everyone will live forever. The situation is similar in PvP as they make themselves and their teammates unkillable. Since Ashes of Creation is a game focusing on perfecting the Trinity system of tank, healer, and DPS, it's important that the system is well balanced. The main topic I will be discussing in this video will be how healers affect game balance, as well as how they've been overtuned in many MMOs in regard to PvP, including on how they work in different situations such as small scale, medium, and large groups. From my experience from playing MMORPGs, healers have always been a big problem. The devs can never see to balance them properly. I also feel like in certain MMOs, the game does not punish you enough for using your abilities poorly. This could also be because they do not give enough depth into healing in general. I believe that the main reason why healers tend to be overpowered in PvP and MMOs is because they fail to balance PvE healing with PvP healing. This always results in the healer being the best class in PvP. It sometimes gets to the point where if you don't have a healer on your team, the game can feel unplayable in open world and in arenas. A good example is when I played Lost Ark PvP ranked arenas and was climbing my way through the rankings. Whenever one team would get a support character, i.e. Bard or Paladin, it felt like you were at a significant disadvantage. I know that many other players felt the same way. This was because they failed to adjust healing power and damage reduction from PvE to PvP. While you were in PvP, you do not need the same amount of damage reduction you would need in PvE in order to survive. I think it's very important for games to have adjusted for both types of content. While you are PvPing and not PvEing, healing should be reduced to the point where a player is not worth 3 or more players. Alright, let's watch the Paladin here. He's going to get hit by my Paladin's sword. I am then going to combo him with my ability, and then he's going to proceed to get knocked up once again here, and he's going to take 0 damage. That's all because of one support's ability. The next game I wanted to discuss was the Elder Scrolls Online, or ESO. They had strong healers, but they were implementing changes based on whether you're in PvP or PvE. While you're in PvP, your damage and healing was reduced by 50%. Even with this nerf, it was not enough to stop how broken healers were in PvP because that wasn't the only issue. Heal over times, aka HOTS, were a big problem. They could be stacked by multiple people on the same person, where if someone had 10% HP, their health would shoot all the way back up to 100% in under a second when all the HOTS would tick at the same time. This made fighting bigger groups very difficult and almost impossible. The only real counter to fighting big groups in ESO was one-shotting with all your ultimates in sync. About 6 or 7 players would have to use their ultimates all at the same time, but if they were off just by a bit, the HOTS would just heal them all the way back up to full health, and then they would have to reset and wait for their ultimates again. The other big counter to killing bigger ball groups was a build called the Bomb Blade. It was a build designed around killing big groups of people through AoE. It did this through the case of having sets that would do more damage based the amount of people around you, and then it would also do damage when you would kill a person, making a chain reaction. It would also rely on ability that once again scaled up of how many people were around you. I don't think this should be the answer, since this kind of makes fighting bigger groups weird. I think it should come through teamwork and group synergy, not just going in for a one shot and then dying immediately afterwards, because you have 0 resistances and no health or really any reliable way to heal. Then we have New World. New World has an action-based combat system that has very little tab targeting. It also faced similar problems where the healer was too overpowered. As buggy as we all know New World was, healer being OP was not because of a bug, believe it or not. It was because of a weapon combo. For those of you who aren't familiar, New World has a weapon swap bar mechanic, letting you hold any 2 weapons in the game, one on your front bar and one on your back bar. In this case, you wanted to run the life staff and the rapier for the combo. The life staff on its own was already overpowered and can hold its own in a 1v1 setting as well as groups very easily. Even the best players in the server would struggle to beat a healer in a one-on-one scenario, requiring them to run a very specific build and also requiring way more work to beat than any other class.
Hello darkness, my old friend.
The rapier made you mobile and increased your survivability, pairing them together made you unkillable. So they had 2 options, nerf the life staff or nerf the rapier, and they went with the latter. In my opinion, they should have nerfed the life staff. The rapier on its own was just a strong weapon, but after the nerf, it was one of the worst weapons in the game. They made it so the cooldowns for the rapier were almost doubled, while the life staff was still plenty strong. This really annoyed me because it just showed how off-base devs were about how to balance healing in games. Good group PvP is pretty much essential for a game to thrive, whether it be small, medium, or large groups. Healers have tended to be a bit too overpowered. Like I mentioned before, in small groups, play some combination made the healer almost unkillable, but you could still counter it. I believe the bigger issue though is large scale PvP. Since there are so many healers, people can just spam stack their heals with little to no consequences, and the survivability of having multiple healers is just way too strong. Lost Ark really showcased how healers affect small scale group PvP. To have a good team, you essentially had to have a healer. It was mandatory or you were at a significant disadvantage in ranked arenas. They were so strong that without one, your odds were winning were something like a 1 in 4 or a 1 in 3 chance, just because you didn't have a healer on your team where everyone was equally skilled. One good example to prove the necessity between a difference in PvE to PvP class strength is Lost Ark leaderboards. 4 out of the top 10 players were a support healer role. This really showcased how overpowered supports were and needed to be nerfed. You also have to keep in mind that supports were a vast minority in the game, so the fact that 40% of the top 10 were supports was pretty insane. ESO on the other hand showed how broken healers were in large scale PvP. Since when you had about 30 or 40 players in a group and 10 to 15 of those were healers, the amount of AoE hots and heal over times they could just stack on everyone made them virtually unkillable, making anyone not running in a very coordinated group where 10 to 15 players had to all use their abilities at the same time just to one-shot them, and if it lags, the hots will just tick and they'll just be screwed over because their opponent's HP will just go back up to full immediately, or you'll be forced to run the one-shot build that I showed previously in the video to stand a chance against fighting bigger groups. I don't think it should be the case. I think this should come through group work and team synergy, not just mindlessly stacking heals and winning through sheer numbers. So how does this all bring us back to Ashes of Creation? Ashes of Creation's class system revolves around a main class and then subclasses. I imagine that it might be a bit difficult to balance everything out, but it's still early in development, so hopefully they avoid these issues by possibly considering the following. They could start by separating PvE from PvP damage and healing numbers. I do think it's possible for them to keep the same damage numbers between PvE and PvP, but doing so would mean that they would have to balance PvE content around PvP content. That would just make balancing a lot harder, since now every time they implement something to PvE, they would have to consider what's going to happen to PvP. Next, how would they deal with stacking heal over times? Since Ashes of Creation is trying to bring back the Holy Trinity system, it's safe to say that healers will be relatively strong in the game, since while doing PvE content, the tank will basically be relying on the healer to solo keep them alive. So when this comes to PvP, it's safe to say healers will be relatively strong at keeping multiple people alive at one time, so this could become a problem when they're in a big ball group and multiple healers are stacking their AoE hots and all their heals on top of each other on everyone in the group. Now they could just lower your healing right out, but this would prevent other classes from having any other chance to heal, since I'm pretty sure Ashes of Creation is going to be a game where you're going to need a healer if you want a reliable way to heal, so the little heals that the classes will be able to get will be null and void if they just lower healing right out. Instead, I would recommend giving certain classes a healing debuff. I think 15% would be a great starting number that can't be stacked and treated like a unique buff. There should be diminishing returns when another player heals a player currently being healed by someone else with the same heal. I think the number should be something like starting from 100 80, 60, and then 40%. We would then stay at 40% and not go any lower. This should not only help take care of the healer problem, but it would also make healing take more skill overall, since people would not be able to mindlessly use their healing effects with little to no downside. Another thing they could implement to make healers have more depth would have healing abilities that would scale up depending on how low health the target is. This would add another layer of depth to healing that I just don't see games doing. This would also make healers a lot more fun to play, since there would be more room for error and more skill in general. The final problem is making it so healers cannot use every weapon in the game. I think this should be for all classes, not just healers. Not allowing every class to use every weapon type is very important to making balancing a lot easier and help prevent situations like an overpowered weapon combo or a meta weapon set, like we saw in New World with the Life Staff and the Rapier. I believe this would also make classes feel a lot more unique, allowing for the game to be more diverse, which I think is overall healthy for the game in general. Ashes of Creation sound like it's going to be a great game. The focus on the PvP and the Trinity system is something I overall look forward to, but it's safe to say I'm a bit skeptical when it comes to class and subclass system in terms of balance. With all the possible class combinations that are going to be introduced into the game, there are definitely going to be some imbalance somewhere, and hopefully it's not the healer. I just think over the years, healers have been getting out of hand and it needs to come to a stop. I would love for AOC to give healers some more depth in PvP than I've seen in past MMOs, and to focus on balancing healers more than I've seen in other PvP games, and not just sweeping it under the rug. I would love to hear your guys' opinions about healers in PvP and whether or not they've been too overpowered, fun, boring, or completely balanced. Leave your opinions in the comment sections below. I'll make sure to read all the comments I can, and with that, I hope you guys did enjoy the video.